Before we begin, we noticed our videos about Jerusalem are not being highlighted. To stand against this injustice, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us respond to this unfair action.
The incredible and breathtaking life story of Sultan Salahaddin Ayyubi. He was the hope of a nation and the nightmare of the enemies. The honorable commander of the Islamic world, a great ruler, helped by Allah during battle. A commander who achieved one of the greatest victories in history. A genius who united the Islamic world. With his intelligence and strategies, he defeated his enemies, and with his justice, he won the hearts of his people. The conqueror of Al-Quds, Jerusalem, Salahaddin Ayyubi, the greatest military legend. Witness his unforgettable story, filled with secrets up close. Let's share his message with more people around the world. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and hit the like button to support. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Once upon a time in Baghdad, there was a renowned carpenter. In the later years of his life, this carpenter crafted a magnificent pulpit. It was made of walnut wood, adorned with mother-of-pearl inlay, and exuded elegance. Everyone who saw it was mesmerized by its beauty. The fame of this exquisite pulpit grew day by day. Visitors to Baghdad would come to him saying, "Sell us this pulpit so we can take it to such and such mosque." Yet his answer was always a firm no. The carpenter would tell everyone, "This pulpit is meant for Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa." People, astonished, would respond, "But Jerusalem is under Crusader occupation." The carpenter, unfazed, would always give the same reply, "This is what I can do. I am a craftsman. I carve pulpits. Let a brave soul emerge to conquer Jerusalem and place this pulpit in its rightful place." This story of the pulpit became widely known. Everyone spoke of its unparalleled beauty. At the time, Jerusalem was under Crusader control. The Crusaders received constant support from the Pope and Europe. Meanwhile, the Seljuk Empire had collapsed. In Anatolia and Mesopotamia, small Islamic states had formed, but they were often in conflict with one another. In Egypt, the Fatimids had emerged, weakening the Muslim community from within. Faced with these three distinct calamities, reclaiming Jerusalem seemed like an impossible dream for Muslims. While it may have appeared as a mere dream to many, one person thought otherwise. Among those who heard the story was a boy, just 7 or 8 years old. However, unlike others, he paid more attention to the craftsman's words than the beauty of the pulpit. 40 years later, that very pulpit was placed where it belonged, in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. The world came to know him as Salahaddin Ayyubi, the birth of a conqueror. His name was Yusuf, but the world knows him as Saladin. Salahuddin Ayyubi was born in 1138 in the city of Baghdad. Through his father, he was of Kurdish origin, while his mother was of Turkish descent. He was actually born in the city of Tikrit, in present-day Iraq. His father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, served Emir Imad ad-Din Zengi of the Seljuk dynasty. After his father passed away, Salahaddin was raised under the care of Zengi ruler Nur ad-Din Zengi from the age of 8. Nur ad-Din Zengi, who had halted the Second Crusade and reclaimed over 50 cities from the Crusaders, earned a reputation that outshone even the Seljuk dynasty. Salahaddin inherited his sense of morality from Nur ad-Din Zengi, who is said to have been the epitome of justice, second only to the 4 rightly guided caliphs. Under the wing of such a great leader, Salahaddin Ayyubi received his education. However, he was more drawn to religious studies than military training. He delved into the arts and sciences, studying logic, philosophy, sociology, jurisprudence, and history. He graduated from the Hadith University in Damascus. This unique education set him apart from many other commanders in history. Perhaps these lessons formed the secret foundation of his strategic genius. Both Eastern and Western historians and writers would later speak of him with admiration, unanimously describing him as devout, compassionate, brave, and commanding. One day, while delivering a Friday sermon, Salahaddin Ayyubi was interrupted by a young man in the congregation who stood up and exclaimed, "Oh, Salahaddin Ayyubi, what are you talking about? Jerusalem is under occupation. What are we discussing here?" Consumed with a zeal for jihad, the young man boldly confronted Salahaddin. Salahaddin, however, gave no response and completed the Friday prayers. The next morning, during Fajr prayer, Salahaddin asked, "Where is the young man who called for jihad yesterday?" The soldiers looked for him and reported back, "He is at home. He didn't come for Fajr prayer." Salahaddin replied, "Tell him, this is why we are not going on jihad for Jerusalem." Salahaddin waited for 7 years before embarking on the conquest of Jerusalem. On another occasion, someone noticed Salahaddin's somber demeanor and asked, "Why do you never smile? Why don't you show joy? Muslims are supposed to smile." Salahaddin responded, "How can you smile when Jerusalem is under Crusader occupation?" True to his word, Salahaddin did not smile until he liberated Jerusalem from the Crusaders. At the age of 26, Salahaddin began taking on various roles within the state under the guidance of his uncle. As he grew older, divine destiny seemed to pave the way for his conquest of Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Nur ad-Din Zengi, Sultan of the Zengi state, managed to unite the Turkish states under one banner, establishing a partial Islamic unity. He successfully reclaimed dozens of cities from the Crusaders. While the Fatimid state in Egypt was in crisis, the Crusaders in Jerusalem were attempting to expand their influence across the Middle East. How did Jerusalem slip from Muslim hands? The loss of Jerusalem was a devastating defeat for the Muslim armies and states that had been marching from victory to victory and expanding rapidly. To understand how this happened, we need to look back in time. The year was 1099. At that time, the Middle East was in turmoil. Many of the problems in the region centered around Jerusalem, as it was widely believed that whoever controlled Jerusalem held the power to rule the entire world. In 1099, the Crusaders, who had established states along the eastern Mediterranean, united their forces and set their sights on Jerusalem. The Fatimids, unaware that Jerusalem was the Crusaders' ultimate goal, failed to take adequate precautions to protect the city. After an 8-day siege, the Fatimids surrendered Jerusalem to the Crusaders. On Friday, July 15th, 1099, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem. They stormed the courtyard of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and carried out a horrific massacre of Muslims. Crusader commander Raymond described the event in a letter to the Pope, using these unforgettable words: "If you ask what was done to our enemies in Jerusalem, know this: our horses waded in Muslim blood up to their knees." Historian and writer Will Durant provides chilling details about the event in his book. Muslim women were killed by being pierced with spears and swords. Babies were forcibly taken from their mothers' arms, thrown from the walls, or had their heads smashed against posts. Among those most determined to reclaim Jerusalem was Sultan Nur ad-Din Zengi. In 1168, Sultan Nur ad-Din Zengi set his sights on Egypt, besieging Cairo. Controlling Egypt would provide a strategic advantage against the opposing side. He dispatched his commanders Shirkuh and Salahaddin to lead the campaign. Shirkuh successfully cleared Egypt of crusaders and was appointed vizier of Egypt due to his achievements. Shirkuh was not only Salahaddin Ayyubi's uncle, but also his most influential mentor. A brilliant military strategist, Shirkuh taught Salahaddin many techniques, allowing him to rapidly hone his skills on the battlefield. However, shortly after assuming his new role, Shirkuh passed away. Salahaddin Ayyubi succeeded his uncle as vizier of Egypt and became the commander of Sultan Nur ad-Din Zengi's army in the region. At just 31 years old, Salahaddin held the dual roles of vizier of Egypt and the title of Malik. Once he established control over Egypt, Salahaddin faced resistance from Fatimid factions and their Crusader and Byzantine allies. He worked tirelessly to consolidate power in Egypt, restructuring the army and preparing for the challenges ahead. He worked tirelessly for the Sunni community, establishing Sunni madrasas and founding new institutions. Gradually, he purged the Batanite Fatimid bureaucracy. Finally, in 1171, upon the command of Nur ad-Din Zengi, he ended Fatimid rule. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly until tragic news arrived. Sultan Nur ad-Din Zengi had passed away. The conquest of Jerusalem was not destined for him. When Zengi suddenly passed away in 1174, the country plunged into internal turmoil. Salahaddin Ayyubi had to simultaneously prevent the state from disintegrating, maintain the Islamic unity established by the late Sultan in the Middle East, and continue the struggle against the Crusaders. Salahaddin, who quelled internal conflicts and restored stability, took up the banner of leadership passed down from his mentor, Nur ad-Din Zengi. Like every Islamic commander of his time, Salahaddin Ayyubi had three great dreams: to unite the Islamic world, to liberate Jerusalem from occupation, and to conquer Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. Islamic unity was achieved through the battles and struggles against the Crusaders of that era. The next target was reclaiming Jerusalem. Salahaddin's passion and determination for Jerusalem were well described by Qadi Baha al-Din ibn Shaddad. He was so overwhelmed with sorrow for Jerusalem that even mountains could not bear the weight of his grief. He was like a mother mourning the loss of her child. He would ride his horse tirelessly from place to place, urging Muslims to join the jihad to liberate Jerusalem. He would immerse himself in gatherings of people crying out, "For Islam, for Islam." His eyes were always filled with tears of sorrow. This state of anguish and determination stemmed from the occupation of Jerusalem. He often said, "As long as the city of Jerusalem and Al-Masjid al-Aqsa are under Crusader occupation, how can I laugh? How can I rejoice? How can I eat in comfort? How can sleep ever come to my eyes?" Salahaddin Ayyubi was resolute in his mission to reclaim Jerusalem. Before setting out to conquer Jerusalem, order and discipline were essential. Salahaddin Ayyubi united the numerous scattered and disorganized forces, bringing them under strict discipline to shift the balance of military power in his favor. With this unified strength, he turned his full attention to the Latin Crusader kingdoms. For Salahaddin Ayyubi, the time had come to become a nightmare for the Crusaders. He continuously devised strategies to drive the Crusaders out of the eastern Mediterranean. According to the chroniclers of the time, whenever discussions arose in any gathering, Salahaddin would somehow link the conversation back to Jerusalem. The cross placed atop the dome of the rock, and the cries of the Muslim women and children massacred on Friday, July 15th, 1099, haunted his dreams, depriving him of sleep. In 1177, the Crusaders committed atrocities against Muslims near Ramla. In response, Sultan Salahaddin set out from Egypt to confront the Crusaders. When he reached the vicinity of Ramla, he dispersed his army to nearby villages and towns to gather supplies and captives. While he gained some spoils and took prisoners, the 16-year-old leper King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem was pursuing Salahaddin with his army. Caught off guard, Salahaddin's 26,000-strong army, fatigued and disorganized, faced a sudden crusader assault. The crusader forces split Salahaddin's army in two with a swift maneuver and encircled his troops with their long-lanced cavalry. By nightfall, Salahaddin's forces had suffered over 20,000 casualties. One of Salahaddin's sons was also martyred in this battle. When the news of the defeat reached the people, fear spread, and rumors of Salahaddin's death echoed throughout Egypt. However, when Salahaddin finally returned to Egypt with his personal guards, he was greeted with immense joy and celebrations. Salahaddin Ayyubi then began organizing campaigns, establishing himself as the representative of Islam through his conquests. The Ayyubid dynasty continued to grow stronger with each passing day. One of the greatest challenges for Muslims since the First Crusade had been their inability to act in unity. Salahaddin ultimately broke this cycle, successfully uniting a vast majority of the Islamic world under his leadership. The territories of the Ayyubid state stretched from Egypt to Aleppo, and they controlled a significant portion of the Red Sea. This state, whose population was primarily Kurdish and Arab, was governed from Damascus, which also served as the center for Salahaddin's military operations. Salahaddin Ayyubi took pride in the successes of his state. However, he could not reconcile himself to the fact that the Holy Lands were in Christian hands. Like many rulers before him, he dreamed of conquering Jerusalem. Though he had attempted it in the past, he had failed. 10 years earlier, he had suffered a devastating defeat against the young King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem at the Battle of Montgisard. Years later, Salahaddin had rebuilt his armies and devised new strategies against the Crusaders. Thanks to Egypt's agricultural wealth, the Ayyubid state had rapidly become an economically powerful entity. In the same year, the Battle of Marj Uyun took place between Salahuddin al-Ayyub and the Crusaders. As the Crusaders advanced along the coastal plains, they spotted Salahaddin's encampment below them. Believing a sudden attack would give them an advantage, they launched a swift assault from the hilltops. However, Salahaddin's forces were prepared for surprise attacks and quickly assumed battle positions, countering the enemy's advance. Salahaddin emerged victorious from the battle. Tirelessly pressing forward, he continued to reclaim villages and towns from the Crusaders, including the fortress of Ahsan, the resting place of Prophet Jacob, peace be upon him. The Crusaders, overwhelmed by the relentless Muslim offensives, could no longer endure. In 1282, the King of Jerusalem and Salahaddin reached a peace agreement. According to the terms, both Muslims and Christians were guaranteed the safety of their lives and property. During the peace period, Salahaddin expanded his campaigns, attacking Armenian territories and capturing numerous fortresses. When Nur ad-Din Zengi's son, Ismail Zengi, died in his 20s after being poisoned, Salahaddin took control of the city of Aleppo from the Zengids. The peace agreement between the Muslims and Crusaders lasted for about 3 years. However, it was broken when King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem died from leprosy. Baldwin had contracted the disease at the age of 9. As the sole heir to the throne, his education was given special attention since his ascension was deemed inevitable. At 13, Baldwin ascended to the throne, but by the time he entered puberty, the disease had progressed rapidly, causing his skin to deteriorate and decay. For the remainder of his life, Baldwin concealed his disfigurement by wearing masks, gloves, and heavy clothing that covered his entire body. At the time, leprosy was considered a divine curse. Despite his youth and illness, Baldwin's reign faced constant threats, with Salahuddin al-Ayyub ever watchful and determined to reclaim Jerusalem, posing the greatest danger. Salahaddin, like a hunter stalking his prey, waited patiently for the right moment to strike. A few years after these events, Salahaddin Ayyubi decided to launch an attack on the Crusaders. His target this time was the castle of Kerak. After several days of planning, Salahaddin launched his assault. However, news of the attack reached Baldwin IV far too early. At this point, Baldwin was 24 years old, and his leprosy had severely advanced. He was nearly blind, unable to use his hands, and even incapable of mounting a horse. To lead his army to Kerak Castle, he had to be carried on his bed by his soldiers. When Salahaddin learned that reinforcements had arrived from Jerusalem, he lifted the siege and withdrew. This journey marked the final chapter in the life of the leprous king. Baldwin's already dire health worsened after the campaign, and shortly after returning to Jerusalem, he died from leprosy at the age of 24. After Baldwin IV's death, his 9-year-old nephew, Baldwin V, ascended the throne. This development pleased Salahaddin Ayyubi, as it paved the way for his deeper plans to conquer Jerusalem, which he would achieve 3 years later. Salahaddin's grand plan. The new king, who succeeded Baldwin IV, declared the peace agreement with the Muslims void. He permitted the burning of Muslim caravans and villages. The Crusaders went as far as attacking a caravan of returning Muslim pilgrims, massacring them. The Prince of Kerak personally looted these caravans and mockingly exclaimed, "Where is your Muhammad now? Call him to help you," as he executed Muslims, laughing hysterically. The actions of the Prince of Kerak were the final straw for Salahaddin Ayyubi. He swore, "I will kill that prince with my own hands." Salahaddin then sent word to all Islamic states, declaring his preparation for the conquest of Jerusalem. From Egypt, Syria, the Abbasids and the Turks to all corners of the Muslim world, volunteers began joining Salahaddin's army, eager to be part of the force that would reclaim Jerusalem. When news of this reached the Crusaders, their initial plan was to fortify Jerusalem and prepare for its defense. However, the new king sought to prove himself and decided to confront Salahaddin in open battle instead of resorting to what he saw as cowardly defensive measures. The Crusader armies eventually mobilized to face the Islamic forces. Salahaddin, known for his extraordinary strategies, devised a meticulous plan. Among his most trusted men were two key figures: his son, Malik Afdal, whom Salahaddin had entrusted with the governance of Damascus, and his most reliable commander, General Gokboru, a key general of the Ayyubid army. Salahaddin first assigned Gokboru the task of scouting the borders of Tiberias and identifying water wells in the area. Once this mission was complete, Salahaddin launched an assault on the castle of Tiberias, capturing it within a day. This move left the Crusaders unsure of their next step, forcing them to engage the Ayyubid forces. Salahaddin's plan was now in full motion. He dictated the rules of the engagement, drawing the Crusaders into battle at a location of his choosing, a flat plain near Tiberias. There, Salahaddin set the stage for one of the most decisive confrontations in the history of the Crusades. The Battle of Hattin Salahaddin Ayyubi began waiting for the Crusader army near the village of Hattin in the scorching heat of July 1887. The battle commenced with Salahaddin's mounted archers relentlessly attacking and retreating, harassing the advancing Frankish forces. As a Muslim historian described, arrows rained upon them, turning their lions into porcupines. The following day, a decisive clash occurred. Salahaddin managed to deploy an army of 50,000 to 60,000 soldiers near Hattin. The Crusaders were led by Guy of Lusignan, the king of Jerusalem. Anticipating the Crusaders' movements, Salahaddin had filled the wells he had captured months earlier with sand and rubble, leaving the Crusaders without a water source. When they reached the wells, they found them unusable and had no choice but to press forward, knowing retreat was impossible. The Crusaders were vastly outnumbered and severely suffering from thirst. Meanwhile, the Muslim army, well supplied with provisions carried on camel-drawn wagons, intensified the Crusaders' misery by setting fire to dry grass and bushes. The extreme heat, combined with their heavy armor and dehydration, left the Crusaders weakened and dying one by one. The disarray in the Frankish ranks became evident as their infantry lost cohesion and could no longer provide the protective formation crucial for their heavily armored cavalry. As night fell, the Crusader army decided to rest. In the stillness of the night, a sharp whistle broke the silence, the sound of an arrow. The final confrontation had begun, and dawn was breaking. Salahaddin positioned his forces with the Jordan River, fed by the Sea of Galilee, at his back. Between the Crusaders and the water source stood the Ayyubid army. According to one account, the Crusader forces numbered 63,000, heavily armed and determined to reach the water. Having spent the night without water, the Crusaders launched a desperate attack at dawn to break through Salahaddin's lines. However, the Muslim forces repelled their charge. By the second day, the Crusaders' thirst had worsened. They launched another assault in a frantic attempt to reach the water, but they were repelled once more. As exhaustion and dehydration overwhelmed the Crusader army, Salahaddin ordered a full-scale attack. The Muslim forces swiftly encircled the weakened Crusaders, trapping them in a deadly ring. By the end of the battle, over 30,000 Crusader soldiers had been killed and another 30,000 taken prisoner. The Battle of Hattin marked a decisive victory for Salahaddin Ayyubi and paved the way for the eventual liberation of Jerusalem. Among the captives were Guy of Lusignan, king of Jerusalem, and Reynald de Chatillon, the prince of Antioch, who had blasphemed against Prophet Muhammad, alayhi salatu wasalam. In Islamic tradition, offering water to a prisoner symbolized forgiveness. In a gesture of magnanimity, Salahaddin personally handed an icy sherbet to Guy, quenching the thirst of his vanquished enemy. This act of mercy left a lasting impression on Western observers, and Salahaddin's portrait was later painted in admiration. As was customary in medieval warfare, some nobles, including King Guy, were later released in exchange for ransom. However, when Guy took a sip of the water and offered it to Reynald, Salahaddin drew his sword. The time had come to fulfill his oath. It was now the moment to seek justice for the Muslim Ummah and to avenge the insults Reynald had directed at the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. Salahaddin executed Reynald on the spot, putting an end to his deeds. The remaining prisoners were brought before Salahaddin, chained and kneeling. The knights of the two militant orders, the Templars and the Hospitallers, were deemed fanatical and highly dangerous, and they were executed. The rest of the captives were sold into slavery. Afterward, Salahuddin al-Ayyub visited the tomb of Prophet Shuaib, peace be upon him, near Hattin, and offered prayers. The Third Crusade. On October 2nd, 1187, Salahuddin al-Ayyub ended the 88-year Frankish occupation of Jerusalem. In response to this defeat, Christians launched efforts to reclaim the city. Pope Gregory III called for the Third Crusade to retake Jerusalem, and three of Europe's most powerful monarchs answered the call: Frederick I, Barbarossa, King of Germany and Holy Roman Emperor, King Philip II of France, and Richard the Lionheart of England. Frederick Barbarossa entered Anatolia with an army of approximately 100,000 soldiers. However, his campaign suffered heavy losses due to unexpected resistance. After Barbarossa drowned in the Silifke River, his army dispersed, rendering the German crusaders ineffective. Meanwhile, the French and English crusader forces traveled by sea but failed to defeat Salahuddin al-Ayyub. Unable to achieve victory, they eventually retreated. Following Salahaddin's triumph, within 3 months, the cities of Acre, Nablus, Jaffa, Tebnin, Beirut, and Ascalon fell into Ayyubid hands. The Crusaders no longer had a viable army to defend Jerusalem. News of Salahaddin's victory at Hattin and his march toward Jerusalem spread across the Muslim world, inspiring volunteers from all regions to join his army. When Salahaddin's forces finally reached Jerusalem, the siege began. All eyes were fixed on the crosses mounted atop the city's walls, including the large cross placed on the dome of the rock. This sight only fueled the Muslims' resolve. Catapults began bombarding the city's walls, and when word reached Salahaddin that the northeastern walls were weaker, he redirected the siege engines to target that area. After relentless catapult fire, the northeastern wall collapsed. The Crusaders attempted a breakout maneuver through the breach, but Salahaddin's forces surrounded and trapped them. Faced with no other options, the Crusaders ultimately surrendered. Salahaddin's victory marked a pivotal moment in the Crusades, firmly re-establishing Muslim control over Jerusalem. The surrender of Jerusalem. Upon entering the city after its surrender, Salahaddin Ayyubi's army took control of Jerusalem with remarkable discipline. Unlike the Crusader conquest of 1099, no buildings were looted, no individuals were harmed, and no victorious soldiers mistreated the people. Salahaddin ensured the safety of all Christians by deploying patrols to guard the streets. The Ayyubids had set specific terms for taking the city. A ransom of 10 dinars per man, 5 dinars per woman, and 2 dinars per child was required. Those unable to pay the ransom would become prisoners of the Muslims. Additionally, crops, products, weapons, and houses would belong to the Muslims. Crusaders were allowed to relocate to the city of Tyre for safety. A 40-day grace period was granted for paying the ransom. After this time, those unable to pay were taken captive. Under these terms, 16,000 people, men, women, and children, became prisoners. On a Friday, Salahaddin and the Muslims entered the city before the prayer time. On the very first Friday, the crosses, clergy, and pigs found in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa were removed, and the mosque was thoroughly cleaned. The Templars had built chambers for themselves in the western part of the mosque's grand mihrab, even using it as a storage room. All of this was cleaned and restored to its original state from the Islamic period. The dome of the rock was washed with pure water and then perfumed with rose water and musk. The large cross atop its dome was taken down and replaced with a crescent. Salahaddin then had the magnificent pulpit, crafted years earlier by Nur ad-Din Zengi, brought to Jerusalem. While Nur ad-Din had hoped to place the pulpit there himself, the conquest was realized after his passing through Salahaddin's leadership. The pulpit was set next to the mihrab. Carpets were laid, lamps were hung, and prayer rugs were placed. Prostrations were made, prayers and invocations rose to the heavens, and blessings descended. Worshippers filled the mosque, and the call to prayer echoed. The cries of Allah is one replaced the silence of the clergy. Misery vanished, joy filled the air, and hardship gave way to divine mercy. Worship was offered to Allah, the one and only, the self-sufficient, who begets not nor is begotten, and to whom nothing is equal. Truth had triumphed and falsehood had perished. Justice for all non-Catholic Christians, Orthodox and Syriacs, were allowed to remain in Jerusalem after paying a personal indemnity and agreeing to an annual jizya tax. When news of Salahaddin's conquest of Jerusalem reached Constantinople, Byzantine Emperor Isaac II, Angelos sent an envoy to congratulate Salahaddin and requested that the holy Christian sites be restored to Orthodox Christian administration. Salahaddin, wanting to avoid placing any additional burden on Christian pilgrims, agreed to this request, and the holy sites came under Orthodox control. Remarkably, The holy Christian sites remained closed for only 3 days after the city's return to Muslim rule. This conquest demonstrated the justice and fairness of Islam and its followers toward people of other faiths. Despite the torment, insults and massacres endured during the Crusader occupation, the Muslims refrained from retaliating in kind. Instead, Salahaddin ensured that no harm came to the people of Jerusalem, embodying the principles of mercy and justice. The passing of Salahaddin Ayyubi. Salahaddin Ayyubi, known as the conqueror of Jerusalem, stands among the most renowned heroes of the Islamic world. The madrasas he established in Egypt became centers of knowledge, attracting scholars and students from across the Islamic world. These institutions produced numerous scholarly works, cleansing Egypt of Shiism and transforming it into a hub of learning. Ibn Shaddad described Salahaddin as a man of profound historical knowledge and broad cultural understanding. He was a leader who valued his word, loved forgiveness, and upheld his promises at all costs. In 1193, as Salahaddin lay on his deathbed, the great commander, who had shielded Islam with his chest against the Crusader armies, made a final request. "Bring me a long stick," he said. Though puzzled by the meaning behind this request, those present fetched him the stick. Struggling to lift his hand from beneath a woolen blanket, Salahaddin pointed to a cabinet in the corner. "Inside is my burial shroud. Take it out and tie it to the end of this stick," he instructed. His companions, both curious and moved, did as he asked. Seeing the white burial shroud fluttering from the end of the stick, the great hero gave his final command. "Now take this stick and walk through the streets of Damascus. At every corner proclaim, 'O people, you know our ruler, Salahuddin al-Ayyub. Behold, he leaves behind all his treasures and wealth, taking nothing with him but this 2 arms length shroud.'" Salahuddin al-Ayyub passed away on March 4, 1993 in Damascus. On that day, the people recited the Quran and offered prayers for the great commander. They wept for their beloved ruler, who, with profound simplicity, declared that none of his wealth or grandeur would accompany him to the afterlife, only a plain burial shroud. Salahaddin's life exemplified how a Muslim should set goals. His heart beat for Allah, striving for justice on earth and spreading the beauty of Islam to those unaware of it. The conquest of Jerusalem was achieved through this awareness and dedication. Why then do we not see such blessings today? Perhaps because we must first change ourselves. Our lives, dreams, and ambitions are too focused on worldly matters. Many of us think only of ourselves and our comforts. We must reflect on our priorities and cultivate hearts that beat for Allah, setting grand goals for Islam. Remember, like the great Sultan Salahaddin, our bodies too will one day be wrapped in a shroud which has no pockets. May Allah make us among those who live with the awareness that nothing from this world will accompany us, focusing instead on the life of the hereafter. Ameen. Even when planets align, if you feel alone in this vast universe, this channel is for you. To ensure this video reaches others like you before it disappears into the vastness of YouTube, your support is vital. Every subscription helps us reach more hearts in need. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Share your thoughts and play a part in spreading the name of the hero Salahuddin al-Ayyub to the world. May Allah bless you. Assalamu alaikum.